listeners. Welcome to the Crime Tales from Travels podcast, the show where we highlight crimes from the locations we have traveled to, or maybe even just passed through. I'm your host, Kimberly Rotette, and today we have an episode planned for you from a location that is near and dear to my heart. But before we jump into that, let's quickly review the criteria from the premise of the podcast episode. Locations make this list either if myself or my spouse have either traveled to this location, spent any time in this location, maybe we've traveled through, perhaps on a road trip. Hopefully you get the idea. We're not just picking locations of crimes, but we are choosing locations that are personal to us from travel through, time spent, or even just maybe hitting the road and gassing up in a location. Some place that we've stopped and encountered something whilst traveling. But then we're researching those cases and then seeking to share them with you. In today's location, Muncie, Indiana. And why is this location near and dear to me? Well, and the answer is pretty simple. I'm an alum from at least one of my degrees from Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. Continue though, before we dive into this episode, please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also find us on Instagram. You can follow us there, Crime Tales from Travels. You can also find more information about this episode in the show notes section on the website, kroproductions.net. Crime Tales from Travels is a part of the Kro.Productions network. You can find this podcast, as well as our other podcasts where we focus on living life outside of the work that we do, on YouTube by searching Kro Productions Network. Today we're going to discuss the shooting of Mike McKinney. Notice that I said shooting, and I want to draw just quick attention to the fact that in the last episode, I spoke about how we're not only going to focus on murders. We do want to, as best we can, depending upon the crimes that have been committed in these locations, diversify as best we can the crimes that we're going to be covering. But I wanted to touch base on the shooting of Mike McKinney in that language. And here's a little bit more info about that. You know, I noted in the intro that this particular location is very near and dear to my heart. And while this particular shooting took place several years after I graduated, I can remember a significant amount of discussion about this case and how this shooting impacted the community at Ball State. You know, this community that I do hold so dear to me. Also noted within our previous podcast, in no way, as I retell this story, in no way, shape, or form do I mean any disrespect to the families or the loved ones of either the McKinney or the Duplain family. I am relying a little bit of first-hand knowledge on the Ball State community in terms of the location of the incident, but I'm also relying heavily on a fair amount of resources and articles written about this shooting. Those resources will be on the show notes page of the website, and again, that website address is kroproductions.net. And I am calling this a shooting, not a murder, because that is what has been consistently reported throughout all of these show notes references that I have been able to find. With some of those details addressed, let's jump in here and let's talk about when did the shooting occur. On Saturday, November 7th, 2003, Mike McKinney, who was a business and marketing major in telecommunications at Ball State University, went out with some friends. They went out to the well-known, it's certainly very well-known to so many Ball State students, to the Village area. According to caselaw.com, at approximately 3 a.m., on what would now be November 8th, 2003, he left the Village. A witness, a gentleman by the name of Brent Archambault, reported saying that Mike was crawling on his hands and knees. According to Archambault, he asked McKinney if he was okay or if he needed a ride home. McKinney told him that he was already home and he had perched himself up on a tree. Unfortunately, though, McKinney was not at his home, but instead at the home of Jane Poole, a widow who lived near the area of the Village at Ball State. McKinney made his way from the front of the Poole home to the back and began pounding on the door, and it was reported on case law that he was trying to get into the patio door and shaking it and pulling on it. Not recognizing McKinney, Poole called 911, which was routed to the Delaware County 911. Also shared via case law was a transcript of that phone conversation. I'm going to read that for you. 911, what's your emergency? Poole, hurry, someone's pounding. A man's pounding on my back door. 911, what's your address? Poole, North Street, She inserts the full address, but says, "He's at the back door. He's pounding really hard." 911. "Okay, do you know who it is?" "Pool." "No. 911. "Okay, what's your phone number?" "Pool." She provides her phone number. 911. "Are you expecting anyone?" "No," Pool said. 911. "What's your name?" "Pool. Jane Pool. Please hurry." 911. "Okay, ma'am, we're on the way." "Do you know what he looks like?" Pool. "No." 911. "Do you know if it's a male or not?" Pool. Yes, he had no hair. White. Very white." 911. "Is he still there?" Pool. "Yes, he's been pounding." 911. "Is he saying anything?" Pool. "No, he's just trying to get in. Please." 911. "We're on the way, ma'am. How long has he been there?" "Hello? Hello?" She just hung up on me. According to the reporting and materials I found, Pool had hung up on the 911 operator and called her neighbors, Mike and Nancy Ellis. Pool told Mike Ellis about the situation, but told him not to come over as she'd already called the police. The Ellises then went to a second-story window in one of the bedrooms, which overlooked Pool's backyard. From there, Mike Ellis saw McKinney move away from Pool's deck and toward a tree in the backyard. Mike Ellis said he noticed that McKinney stumbled a bit, and he testified that he appeared intoxicated. Nancy Ellis also described McKinney as, quote, very wobbly. Now, some of you might ask, was it the Muncie Police Department who responded? Muncie Police did respond, but they also immediately contacted Ball State University Police as they were closest to the scene, so Muncie Police called for assistance. Because of the close proximity of their patrol areas, Ball State University PD continues to monitor the Muncie Police Department dispatches, and as I understand it, 4 Ball State University police officers responded to that dispatch. Officers Robert Duplain, Matt Gaither, and Eric Perkins, as well as their shift supervisor, Corporal David Bell. According to caselaw.com, the 4 Ball State University police officers driving separate vehicles arrived at the Pool's residence somewhere around 3:26 a.m. After arriving, Corporal Bell and Officer Perkins walked up the east side of the home. They did have their weapons drawn. Officer Gaither went to check the front of the house. And Officer Duplain, I guess when he noticed that the other areas were covered, he approached the backyard of the house from the west side of the house. When Officer Duplain entered the backyard, he saw McKinney standing under a tree, approximately 10 to 20 feet away. The parties dispute what happened next. Officer Duplain explained that after entering the backyard, he began shouting commands at McKinney, although the various witnesses heard different things. Officer Duplain reports that he remembers saying, quote, "Police, show me your hands. Get on the ground. Get the F on the ground. Get on the ground now," end quote. Mike Ellis heard the words, quote, hey, end quote, and possibly, quote, "Stop right there," end quote. Nancy Ellis remembers hearing, quote, hey, end quote. Pool heard, quote, "Hey," end quote. Corporal Bell remembered hearing shouts similar to what, quote, "you would hear a police officer shout to someone. It sounded like lawful verbal orders. Stop, get on the ground," end quote. Officer Perkins heard Officer Duplain say, quote, get on the ground," and a couple of "get the F on the ground," as well as "police," end quote. In court, Officer Duplain testified that while he was shouting commands to McKinney, McKinney did not show signs of intoxication. But Duplain did say McKinney, quote, "squared up against him," end quote. Duplain reported it took McKinney a few seconds before he suddenly charged at him. Duplain said he feared for his life, as well as the safety of the officers and residents. Duplain said that when McKinney got within a few feet of him, he fired his service weapon. As McKinney continued to advance, Duplain fired again. An autopsy would reveal that Officer Duplain shot Mike McKinney 4 times. There was an entrance gunshot wound below his left eye. There was an entrance gunshot wound to the left chest. That particular gunshot pierced the right and left ventricles of McKinney's heart. there was an entrance gunshot wound to the left shoulder. This shot shattered McKinney's humerus bone. And there was another gunshot wound entrance to the left lateral chest area. The autopsy noted 2 additional important points. The autopsy noted that the 4 bullets entered McKinney's body at a downward angle from a horizontal plane. It also showed that McKinney had a blood alcohol level at 0.34. Recall the witnesses at the event as well. The Ellises both testified that Duplain did not fire his weapon until a few seconds before McKinney charged, and also not until McKinney was within a few feet of Officer Duplain. As soon as the shots were fired, the other responding officers heard those shots. Corporal Bell, who was checking on the other side of the property, kicked the gate on the south side of the pool's backyard, allowing him to enter the backyard a few seconds after the shots were fired. He did say he saw McKinney lying on the ground 3 to 4 feet from Duplain. Also, according to caselaw.com, Corporal Bell turned McKinney onto his back and started to administer CPR until assistance arrived. It was about 3 months after the incident that the McKinney family filed a 2-count complaint against Officer Duplain and the Ball State Director of Public Safety, Gene Burton. Count 1 of that complaint alleged that there was an excessive force claim with count 1. For count 2, it asserted that it asserted that a 1983 claim against Burton for allegedly creating and maintaining policies at Ball State University that exhibited deliberate influence or indifference for the constitutional rights of persons at that university. So they alleged excessive force, as well as brought up an old claim against Burton, who was the director of public safety at the time. The legal situation continued to evolve. Duplain and Burton filed motions for summary judgment, basically asserting the defense of qualified immunity. And according to caselaw.com, based on those reports, the estate or the McKinney family argued that McKinney did not charge Officer Duplain, but rather that he was shot twice from the back left side while he was still standing. Then after he turned and started to fall in the direction of Officer Duplain, he was shot 2 more times. Officer Duplain argued that he was entitled to qualified immunity because, given the totality of the circumstance, it was objectively reasonable for him to use deadly force against McKinney once McKinney charged at him. At the end of that particular lengthy legal battle, and one I have no doubt was difficult to endure for both the family as well as the defendants, the courts did side with Duplain, indicating that he did not use excessive force. Duplain was cleared of both any criminal and wrongdoing, as well as won the civil case that had also been filed against him. Ball State officials summed up, the court proceedings by saying, quote, "There are no winners in this case. There was a tragedy that deeply affected everyone involved," end quote, and they offered their condolences to the McKinney family. You'll likely notice that I mentioned case law several different times. That was one of the main sources I looked to as I was just trying to retell this story, because I thought it did a very detailed job of explaining step by step what was reported and what was testified, what people said in their testimony. But I'm not a lawyer. I did not go to law school. My spouse did, but I did not. So I needed to do some additional digging to make sure that I better understood everything that took place in court. In addition to those case law files, I pulled up other materials just from the local news sources. I read one of the articles from the Herald Times. One of the articles spoke about the rising tensions in the neighborhoods surrounding the village at Ball State University. Apparently, residents in the community immediately adjacent to the village, they're just not strangers to student noise. Multiple homeowners in that article, I think the article was called "Shooting Highlights Tensions Between Students and Homeowners." Again, this article will be listed and linked within the show notes on the website. But according to that article, it was noted that residents have asked multiple students to leave their property at various times as students were just cutting through their yards to get where they were going. It was reported that windows to homes were broken and that students were banging on doors of homes, not just Mike McKinney, but other students as well, because they didn't know where they lived. And it sounds like from that article in the Herald Times that many of the homeowners around the time of the shooting were very frustrated by what they perceived as inappropriate behavior from students. That same article, though, did try to end on a point of what I hope is hope. Certainly, while some of the homeowners near the village were indeed quite frustrated, many realized and verbally acknowledged that, quote, "These students are our lifeblood in many ways, but we've got to help them find their boundaries," end quote. This resonated deeply with me. In many ways, I look back on my time at Ball State and in Muncie in general, and I can remember knowing then that the university was the pulse of that community in many ways. I'm not sure how Muncie as a community would fare if the university were not in town. I mean, for context, for years, Muncie had endured a steady population decline. They still have. The peak was in the early 1970s at around 133,300 people, and in 2017, the population was just over 115,000. And that's, not necessarily including the university that's there, 9 months out of the year. Those immediate surrounding, counties have even seen the same decline. So it isn't just Muncie, but Muncie and the immediate surrounding communities have been on the decline. Knowing that the population is higher when the students are on campus, knowing that they are helping the economy when they are in school, those things really resonated with me. And it seemed, to at the time that the McKinney shooting, at the time of the McKinney shooting, that was resonating with the community. Students are definitely quite critical to that local community and that local economy. But that doesn't mean that the residents are always okay with the certain behaviors that they might encounter. I thought that point from some of the local residents in the area was quite poignant, recognizing the potential challenges with some of the situations that are occurring right near the village area, but also recognizing how truly important these students are, to the overall community. And there were a lot of other points that were really very strong, in terms of eliciting some strong emotion as well. A lot of the other things that many of the articles I read also noted was that Mike McKinney was not just loved by his family, but on campus as well. He was a member of the Delta Chi fraternity. His family recalled him as not perfect, but just the most tender-hearted of guys. More than I read one of the articles, and again, all of the materials will be linked in the show notes, but articles talking about how more than 400 people attended McKinney's funeral, where he was just remembered as this really sweet young man. And gosh, this entire story was a tough one to go through again. Now, again, I was not there, a student at the time that this occurred. I had already graduated years prior, but I do remember reading this article. I do remember having conversations with my fellow alum, and some of which just friends that I had kept in contact with after graduation. So I didn't know Mike McKinney, but I do know that I recalled reading this and having some of those conversations with fellow alum with a very heavy sense of heartache for not just the McKinney family, obviously the McKinney family, but honestly too for the officer too. From what was presented in the case, the facts seemed just a very tough situation all around for a young officer as well. But honestly, then for the university community, that means so much to me. I have not been back to Ball State University in several years. I have been back since the post the Mike McKinney shooting, but I did walk through the village when I returned. Some of the same places that were there when I was a student there are still there. Some are not. I can't help but wonder if some of those places went out of business just from a reputation, but that's just me speculating and wondering some stuff. Because gosh, we know that alcohol can impair judgment, and it's just sounds like it was just a very, very heavy-hearted situation all the way around, and it was tough to kind of go back and parse through again. But before we wrap up here of what we talked about today, I do want to thank everyone for tuning in. I want to make sure that you guys know that we appreciate you listening. This is a new podcast. This is not what I do full time. I want to be a better storyteller, and I really appreciate the research aspect that goes into a lot of work. When you earn a doctorate, you become very, much engrossed with research and processes. And now I was hoping, not having any formal schooling left to do, that I might be able to take some research and turn it into story sharing and telling. So with that in mind, I appreciate you guys listening. This was a tough case. Hopefully you have not had a chance to encounter something like this in a place that you truly care about. But until next time, we'll borrow the line from our other YouTube channel and our other podcast because it's poignant. Remember to live life outside of the work that you do.